Welcome back, everybody. As you can see, I'm here with Rob this week. We are down to two for a little while, so this is going to be what we're dealing with, unless we're doing specialty episodes where we bring in Josh or some visiting individuals. We wanted to start this week with a different episode, just because of what the things we've been talking about have been very praise and worship oriented. So this time we're gonna focus on the praise and worship, but we're also gonna dive in a little bit to um, how it can affect other forms of worship as well. Um, the title of this episode we're going to throw out there is called "Get the Tech Out of Here." Okay, so the obvious humor in this is we're not talking about the sound tech. Now I could have played that off a lot funnier than I did, but hey, here we are. What are we going to do? So what we're going to talk about this week fundamentally is why technology can be too much too fast sometimes, or even when you're used to it, it can become too much again after the fact. And we'll give some examples of that. So, the whole point of what we're going to talk about this week is we did an episode called The Acoustic Treatment a while back. And the whole idea there was sometimes it's good to just kind of back out of a full tilt episode and, uh, and just do an acoustic type set. Well, this time, what we're talking about is more high level. I'll give you an example. So, sometimes having something like a multi-track can be way more trouble than it's worth. That's just one example. That's not what we're going to harp on. We've done a multi-track episode. I think we beat that one pretty good then. What we're going to talk about this time, though, is overall how those types of scenarios can hurt you. So this week, first thing I want to talk about is why would you want to get rid of tech? There's some things that can really become problematic with your worship and with other forms of worship as well, not just praise and worship. One of the things, let me just take a step back. If you've ever experienced one of these things that I'm about to mention, then you'll understand where we're coming from on this. One of the things would be a long running rehearsal due to having to fight tech. Okay. I won't say we've all been there, but a lot of us have been there. If you've experienced starting late with a rehearsal or even, God forbid, a service because of prepping tech, um, prepping tech would be prepping an iPad, prepping keyboard settings, prepping guitar pedals, whatever that rolls
in-ear
into.
monitors.
In-ear monitors. That's a mean, nasty one that I'm not going to hit on too much because we've been fighting it ourselves this week. The last thing is you could have literally a failed set because tech acts up in the middle of it. So a good example of that is the in-ear monitors just cutting out in the middle of a set, and you've got to recover very quickly. So again, back to the point. If you've ever experienced anything like that, then you know what we're talking about here. So that leads us into the why. Why do we need to back out of tech sometimes? Well, if you're fighting stuff like that literally every week, every service, every practice, then maybe it's a good time for you to kind of take heed of what we're talking about and back out of the tech and go back fundamental. And these fundamental things that we're going to talk about, and we'll dive into each one pretty heavily. What can you really gain by getting the tech out temporarily and then building it back up? Well, one thing is musicianship. So I'm going to throw this over. Rob's musician perspective on this one is going to be critical. But one of the things, having played as well, is sometimes by having things like click tracks, multi tracks, things like that, you lose the fundamental of having to work with another musician. So as a bass player, I can tell you, I would struggle with that. When you get dependent on that click, you lose the ability to listen to the kick drum of the bass drummer and really build a groove there. Doesn't mean you always do that, but it happens. So I'm going to let him speak to the guitar part of that. How does stepping back from technology, how do you think it can, or how has it in your case, if you've done it, how has it made your musicianship better?
Well, before I dive into that as a guitar player, I'm going to talk about it from a drummer's perspective because I'm also a drummer.
Fair enough.
The click is my best friend. As a drummer, the click takes all of the pressure off of me. It takes all the stress off of me as long as it's working. The one caveat to that is it's not always going to work. And the problem that I came most recently, the issue I had with technology, was we're in the middle of a set and the worship leaders, she's doing great, get everybody involved. And then in the middle of one of the songs we did, the click track stopped working. So that put me, my adrenaline starts rushing. I'm starting to want to play faster because my adrenaline's going, and that's something that you really got to watch for. And I think every now and then, if you back the technology out of it and you practice things without a click, it would have allowed me to have been a much better drummer. Now, I was playing in two different churches. One church, I was the drummer for the choir. I played along with the piano player and the bass player. No tech at all, except for wedge monitors and an electronic drum set. The other situation was I've got in-ear monitors, I've got I've got tracks, and I'm able to mix and hear what I want to hear. Having to go back and forth between the two actually made me a better drummer. Then when you look at me as a guitar player, I keep the click in my left ear because I like having the click because I come from a drumming background. Now, the other side of that is if I'm playing guitar, I can do just fine without the click. I don't need the click. I listen to the drummer, and the drummer is where I get my cues from. And this is something that when we get, one of our drummers in here, we're going to do an episode upcoming on what it means to lead the band from the drum set. Because when you look at it really, as far as fundamentally where things stack up, the drummer is the base level. And then the bass player is right above that. And then everybody else, their job is to fall in on the drummer and the bass. That's the rhythm section for a reason.
Well, hang on before you go any further on that one. I got a point on that. Yes, except in praise and worship. And the reason I'm going to expand on this is because I've noticed this. Rob and I both play drums, but I'll go as far as to say with some musical backing, some theory backing, I still don't qualify as a fundamental drummer. And I believe you would probably throw yourself in that as well. You can play drums, but do you know have you mastered the drum set?
Oh, no.
You know
no.
Yeah, we both fall into the same thing. So the problem is when you're talking about bands in general, yeah, that you're exactly right. Your rhythm section, your drums, your bass, that builds your foundation. But when you're talking about praise and worship, it throws a weird kink in. And the weird kink is, just think back to the last time you played with a praise and worship team. The leader starts the song almost every time without the drums. So the leader has to kind of set the foundation that the drums get into, and then the drums become the foundation. So it's kind of a weird, see what I'm saying? So like what we deal with week to week is we transition song to song, and the praise leader leads us into the song, and then all of a sudden the drummer gets into a verse or gets into a chorus, and then from that point forward, they're the leader, but it's weird. You got this dual leader thing.
It is, and the praise and worship world is really it's very unique in that. Yeah. Especially when you consider how often during a song, I mean, not even just talking about beginning the song, but you talk into when you go into a down bridge. Well, usually the drums are quiet at that point because it's the drums in praise and worship tend to have a building effect. It's a constant build, and then it'll just drop out, and then it'll start building over again because modern praise and worship, I mean, from start to finish is usually just one long build or one series of builds.
This is correct. Now, that brings up another interesting point. This is going to fall into the second part of what we were going to talk about that can get better without tech, and it's going to seem counterintuitive, but it's true. Your timing actually can get better without a click, and here's where I go with that. You hit the point dead on the head. So, let's say you're going in, there's no drums, you build into verse, you go into chorus, and then all of a sudden you get to a bridge and there's no drums, and then you build on that. Well, for years, people struggled with that because that missing drums, you lose the beat. So that click track gives you a very fundamental way to keep that going, and this is especially crucial when you talk about things like, patches, synth, that kind of thing that are crucial that they line up, or if you're going to record, for goodness sake, and you have to line it up perfectly, the click is crucial. Where I draw the line and where I think the point that I'm trying to make is it becomes a crutch to a lot of people. That click is just driven in your head, and I will tell you from recent, I actually played drums with one of our things, and I'm not a fundamental drummer, but I can play. I actually prefer not having a click all the time unless I'm recording, and the reason is because it takes away the nuances that the vocalist and that the leaders can put on a song. They may try to do them anyway with a click, but sometimes your voice wants to just kind of draw it, and go below it and come up at the tempo, slow it down a little bit, speed it up. And by not having that click as a drummer, I can actually follow them. If I got that click in my ear, just deet, 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 it's almost impossible for me to slow it down just a little and feel it and coming back. But I didn't want to harp on that, but that's the point I make is that's the different perspectives that we're talking about is Rob loves it because it keeps the stress and anxiety off of him. I'm the exact opposite. I want it but gone because I want to feel the nuances of the song. And for me, that comes from a jazz and blues background. I like to be able to really, play the song, go back and forth. So
whereas I come from more of an '80s rock background,
yeah, which is four on the floor, just boom, boom. But yeah, I get it, and I've played in those. So worship perspectives. That's the whole point of it. Is everybody's got different perspectives. But let's flip that back to the guitarist. You made the point. You said, as a guitarist, I could go without the click. So that's a perfect example of what we're talking about. As a bass player, if I don't have a drummer, I've got to have that click. If I'm a guitarist, I don't necessarily have to have that click. I'm kind of just feeling on top of other people. So everybody's got their own perspective on that. So the two things we've hit so far are it can help your musicianship by backing out of that tech, but it can also help your musicianship by keeping it in. To your point, it has made you a better musician. I just am a huge believer that you can really get hooked on a crutch with a click track and a multi-track and that kind of thing. But the last point I wanted to make, and then I'm going to throw it over to Rob because he has experienced this recently and I know a lot more too. This is one that's going to sound a little weird, but it allows you, without the tech, to focus on your focus. And what I mean by that, and I think Rob gets this, but what I'm really angling at for those who are listening and watching is it becomes, when you've got this click that just keeps you solid in line through a whole set, sometimes you can lose your focus on things like fundamental timing, fundamental notes, things like that, because you've got this track behind you the whole time and you're like, well, we just need to get through it. The track's got it covered. And then all of a sudden you get to one where the track dies or something dies and you're like, we're struggling our musicianship, our focus is not there. So that's the point I kind of finish on for why do we need to back off of it sometimes, is when you can't focus on fundamental musicianship, fundamental timing, because you've gotten so addicted to having these technical things. And that goes beyond just the click track and multi-tracks. That also falls into your keyboard. You've got these keyboards now that can literally be a concert in a box. And you get so, like, I know keyboardists that love it and they can do these amazing sounds, but you spend half the practice, they're like, oh, let me find that string setting. You know what I mean? And that's the exact same thing with guitars.
That's actually a really, really good transition that I wanted to kind of attack this one a little bit later, but since you walked into that,
yeah, let's do it.
Let's talk about time. Let's talk about how much time the technology saves us versus how much it costs us.
Yeah.
Because everybody thinks, oh well, yeah, we've got the tracks, that makes it easy. We just set the tracks and go. Well, you have to mix the tracks. You have to make sure that they all sound good. You have to make sure there's no bad part of the track that's going to mess you up. And even in the last couple of weeks, we've dealt with tracks that have bad parts of them that mess everything up, and we've had to take that part of the track out. We had one, I think last week it was, wasn't it, Matt, where we had the drums just started running away from the track. The recorded drums just started, like, it kicked up into high gear and took off.
Yeah, you're really putting a lot of trust into these musicians that you've never met, playing in times and keys that you've never played, and then you're like, ooh, it sounds awesome, let's play with it, and you get 3/4 through the song, and then all of a sudden there's a bad guitar part that they just didn't take out for some reason, and you're like, why does it sound like garbage this week?
And not only that, but let's look at how much time gets wasted with things like that. Everybody likes to think, and it's the same thing as, somebody showing up late for rehearsal. Everybody thinks, oh, well, you just wasted 5 minutes. Well, I disagree, because I think it compounds. You wasted 5 minutes from the sound tech, 5 minutes from the drummer, 5 minutes from the worship leader, 5 minutes from the guitar player. That right there is 20 minutes. Yeah. So it actually, when you look at how much time you spend fighting with in-ear monitors that aren't giving you the sound that you want, or and I know we said we're going to stay away from that, but fighting with in-ear monitors is something that really kind of, it makes me want to stay away from it. But then again, being the guitar player that I get to hear whatever I want in my ears, and since I know how to mix them, I know how to get the sound nice and clear, it allows me, and as a worship guitar player, my job is not to entertain people. My job is to play to the song and add, as a lead guitar player versus more of like what a rhythm guitar player would do. A lead guitar player's job is only to add emotion. That is the only purpose of that instrument. And to carry, when the singer stops singing, the lead guitar player or the piano player or the keyboard player, they're usually the ones that start playing melody lines that just kind of hold the song together. I have been I mean, just recently I was talking with, a worship leader about this. There was a situation, not this past week, but the week before that. I've never had this happen to me in my entire life, where I'm standing on the stage and I'm playing the song and I'm loving the song, and then all of a sudden everything disappeared. I couldn't hear the click in my ears. I couldn't hear the tracks. I mean, it was like I knew it was there, but I couldn't hear it. Closed my eyes for about half a second, and the stage disappeared. The congregation disappeared. It was just me and God, and it was the most spiritually fulfilling
and terrifying at the same time.
Terrifying at the same time, because I've never had it happen to me before like that. But it was such a touch from the Holy Spirit, and it was physical, and it was mental, and it affected what I saw, and it affected what I heard, and it was just. I'm not even gonna sit here and try to sugarcoat it. I look for that again.
Yeah, I've been there too, and I've also been on the flip side where it was not God, and it was the devil was in the details and the electronics. But I will throw this out there as a hypothetical. So, if you're a keyboard player, would you come in with a brand new keyboard at practice and try to perform a practice? Or if you're a guitar player, would you bring a brand new pedal in that you've never plugged in, and would you do that?
No, I want everything set first.
You experiment with these things. Well, multi-tracks should be no different. Keyboards we just hit on. The point is, a lot of times people get addicted to these multi-tracks and they say, I'm going to go get a multi-track, let's go buy it. And then they come into practice and they're like, why does this not sound good? Well, you've never played with these people. They're in a box, but they're people. They recorded these parts, so now you got to mix in. So the point in all this is, when tech becomes a crutch, that's what we're trying to fundamentally get to, is you need to back out of it, and you need to get back to fundamentals, build back. Let your bass player and your drummer connect again. Let your guitar player really connect on top of it and feel the groove and know where they're going, rather than listening to the cues every week and saying verse, chorus, verse, chorus. God forbid the thing breaks, but I'm not even talking about when it breaks. I'm just talking about, like, as a bass player, I have literally turned off and not used in-ears a lot frequently, because I just want to connect with that drummer and get that groove and lay it down, because it's so easy to get lost in what's in your ears and then realize I'm not even playing with the kick drum anymore. I'm playing with the tracks, and it doesn't matter.
And the other side of that is what happens when you have, and we were talking about a bad section of a track. Well, something that we were dealing with at rehearsal this week, that Matt and I were dealing with, was I was playing a part of a song and it didn't sound right. It was clashing with what somebody else was doing.
Yeah.
Well, I learned the song from the guy who wrote the song.
Yeah.
So I knew I was playing right. Now, that doesn't mean I'm going to jump up there and be like, no, I'm right. But
no, I think what
it ended up being was, it was being played two different ways, and that was clashing together, but we were all playing the right notes. It was just between the delay settings that were being used, and I think there may have been a little bit of a delay on the keyboard, and that caused such a clash it sounded terrible.
Well, and I'll even take a step further. What we ultimately determined from this was, Rob, you were playing it correctly to what you learned it from. It wasn't that you weren't playing it right. What they wrote was wrong. Now, some people would say, well, that's not fair. They wrote the song. It isn't fair to accuse them specifically, but what I'm saying is what they wrote was wrong for us. It didn't fit. It didn't fit the room. It didn't fit the groove. And what was happening is he was having a harmonic on top of I don't even remember how we broke it down, but there was like a harmonic on top of the root note, and the root note was clashing because of the delay. This is something a lot of people have thought. And the point was, yes, you're playing an E and a G sharp, but because of the delay, it's whoop, whoop, whoop. And in that room, it was amplified. And anyway, without boring everybody, the bottom line is, yeah, like Rob probably felt like I was throwing darts at him, like, hey, dude, that sucks. Don't do that ever again. But it was like, hey, guys, something sounds weird. And the problem is, when you use tracks, it's like having 15 other musicians that you don't have normally. And you're like, somebody tell the third guitarist to shut up, and you got to figure out where he is and mute the stupid thing. But yeah, that's a perfect example of where you can get bit. And to wrap that point up is, call it multi-tracks, call it keyboards, call it guitar pedals, heck, bass modeling. It doesn't matter what it is. God forbid you use electronic drums. There's another level of devil that you can't get out, But the point is, any level of technology that you become reliant on can bite you so fast when it doesn't work or when it doesn't fit your groove or anything like that. So to that point, we'll kind of segue into the next thing, which is the tech side of it, not the musician side of it. So I'm going to give you a couple of quick examples. Rob also runs sound as well, so he knows. When you run sound, you've become reliant on having Wi-Fi and network connectivity to your boards, to your broadcast, your streaming, and stuff like that. These are wonderful things until they're not, till they break, till they become a pain. Wi-Fi has become the bane of my existence. I'm an IT guy by trade. And I will tell you right now, Wi-Fi's come a long way, but it still creates trust issues like nobody's business. But
well, I mean, look at our last week's episode. Our last week's episode was filmed the way it was because the Wi-Fi here went down, so we had to come up with a new way to film it, and that's why we ended up with like that echo that was the bane of
we will do everything in our power to not have that happen again. And that's a good example. The Wi-Fi actually went down there, but like almost every new digital board that you have can be controlled from a computer, from an iPad. It's a wonderful thing. You can go sit in the room with an iPad and you can mix, and all the soundmen are like, oh my God, have you tried this? This is amazing. You've got to do this. And then all of a sudden the Wi-Fi is out and you need to mute something really fast and it won't connect. And all of a sudden you got a microphone going nuts in the middle of the room. You see what I'm saying? So you become crutched these things.
And then all of a sudden there starts being feedback and you can't get to it to
yeah, if you ever see a sound man run into the board, yeah, this is about to get fun real fast. Because
I can think of one particular week where I had my oldest son running the slides. I had the sound mixing console all set up. My sound tech was out, but there was no drummer. I didn't have another drummer. So I had everything set, and I run downstairs because the sound room there is upstairs. I run downstairs, go get behind the drum kit, and realize, wait a minute, the slides aren't working. So here I am shooting visual daggers at my oldest son, like, hey, get back. You know the joke about the guy that turned around and turned into a pillar of salt because he turned around and glared at the sound tech.
That's a pretty good reference.
It was one of those things where it turns out that the congregation could see it because one of the projectors was off and I hadn't even taken that into account. So I'm expecting to see the slides on the confidence monitor and instead I'm seeing nothing. So I run up there thinking, telling my son, you got to pay attention to this stuff. And as soon as I get up there, I can see, well, the congregation, their monitor's working just fine. So they've got the lyrics. So I ran up there for nothing.
And anyone who ever wonders just how bad we rely on tech anymore, just run lyrics for one Sunday. Your heart just won't handle it. The first time you're like, wow, this is terrifying. People always walk up to me when I try to recruit people to learn to run sound and things, and they're like, man, that board looks terrifying. I'm like, no, that, and I point at the lyric computer. I'm like, that's terrifying. You don't know terror until you miss that slide, and every eye in the place, +3, are looking right at you. And I had one semi-recently where I had to run the lyrics because someone was out, and our pastor looked at me after, and he was like, can we go to that next slide? I'm like, I got the little beach ball of death. Give me a minute. I'm sitting there waiting on the computer to catch up. And I personally don't care because I've got thick skin. But there's some people that would sit back there and would freak out. So that's just a small example of where, yeah, your tech, no matter how much you trust it, will burn you. So learn to become non-reliant on it. But let's take a spin away from that a little bit. Anybody who's ever dealt with this knows this pain, but this is for the people that might be learning new things, trying to implement MIDI cues, trying to implement automation, which is another episode we'll get into, trying to implement MIDI with keyboards. I've actually worked with someone recently that was trying to do like MIDI controllers on their keyboard and use things, and they were asking me, have you ever used Ableton? I'm like, you need to stop. I said, I love Ableton, but it is not something that you need to experiment and then play it. I said, that is a tool that requires thought. There's a lot of tools like that. So,
and I love Ableton. Ableton is my go-to. When I got my little Focusrite audio interface, it came with a free version of Ableton. Well, before that, I was messing around with Cakewalk, and that was a nightmare.
C word.
I did, I did, and it was a nightmare. I mean, latency was terrible. I could not fix it.
I had a praise leader actually approach me one time and say, our drummer was talking about using Ableton. Is that something that I could learn, that I could control? And I'm like, stop, no, that's not where you want to be. So this is right about the time that Luke Community came out with the Prime app, and I'm like, here, this is easy. Use this, please God, don't use Ableton. So you get the idea. It's not for everybody. Everything has its ups and downs. There are tech people and there are non-tech people. There are things that are friendly to both. But I wanted to use that to segue into one last thing that I want to talk about, and then we're going to freestyle it from there. But if you've ever worked on an old piece of technology, you'll understand where I'm coming from. Please don't go buy a $50 tablet and expect to be running praise and worship on it the next week.
Yeah.
Invest a little bit of money if you're going to use tech. The point of this is if tech is getting in the way, you need to step back. But if you're going to use tech, you got to understand that price matters. There's a reason that iPads are the predominant thing in multimedia for these types of things. It's not against Android. It's just that Apple products tend to work more consistently with these programs because the people who write them are on those tools. Android's a wonderful tool. I use Android. I support Android. But at the end of the day, when I'm mixing from a board, when I'm running tracks, I use an iPad. Now, that's not me promoting an iPad. I'm not just saying, hey, you need to buy Apple stuff. I'm just saying if you want the reliability and to know that you're not going to get burned most of the time, that's how I feel about it.
I mean, when you really think about it, Apple from the very beginning was more for content creators than anything else.
And multimedia writers, designers. When these technologies came out, I'll be honest with you, Android wouldn't connect to most of them. And now they do, and that's a wonderful thing. But like the X32 mixers that we've done on some other episodes, those, when they came out, they were iOS. That's all they offered because that's all the developers they could get would write in because Android was too sparse. It was all over the place. So that's not saying don't use Android. It's just saying don't go get a cheap Chinese knockoff tablet and hope to be running, these apps and these multi-tracks and stuff on it and not expect to have problems. Now, one of our musicians uses an Android tablet and loves it, and it is reliable, and I give him props on that. He found one he loves. But for every one of those, there's 48 that I will just throw in the trash and be like, no, just go get an iPad, So anyway, I just wanted to hit on that point, that if you are going to invest in the tech, invest in it the right way. And this applies to guitar equipment. This applies to keyboards. This applies to whatever. Rob's the biggest proponent of the tools he uses, and they are high-end pedals and modeling and patches. I have seen people walk in with these crazy Bluetooth rigs that have just come out, and they're like, have you seen what this thing will do? And I'm like, have you tested that live? let's practice with that a few weeks before we roll.
I've got a perfect example of that. I was trying to come up with, for budget worship leaders, I wanted to get the cheapest wireless guitar system that I could find. Yeah. And I found one. It was from a company called Guitaria, and it was a 2.4 Bluetooth wireless setup. And this thing was absolutely great until you turned it on. Yeah. Because once you turned it on, if there was a phone in the room, the interference from it went nuts. And I ended up finding a wireless system that I use now for like $58. I mean, it's still ridiculously cheap, but it works well. Because and honestly, I had at that point given up on having a wireless guitar. After the first one, I said, you know what, this one burned me. And then I'm reading about this other one, and I was like, well, that actually sounds like the technology may work. And I showed it to Matt, and Matt said, don't you dare bring a wireless system anywhere near any board that I'm working on. Well, it turns out that it works well, but only because I tested it beforehand. Yeah. I spent plenty of time recording with it. I spent time, doing everything that I would normally do with it, leading worship with it. And honestly, it's just been an absolute joy that's given us absolutely zero problems. However, for that one cheap wireless guitar system that works, there's 11 billion of them that don't. So you've got to do your research. Anytime you're going to implement any tech, do your research on its reliability. And the second thing is, think about how it's going to affect the rest of your team. Because every little gimmick that you get, hey, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread, well, that means somebody has to be able to use it effectively. So if you're bringing in a new way to have a confidence monitor and the program doesn't work with the programs that you already are using, then it's no good and you just wasted your money. So you want to not just, I'm not saying don't get new tech. What I'm saying is be very careful, count the cost on it, and talk to the rest of your team and make sure that whatever you're about to pick up is going to work with what the rest of the team's already using.
Yeah, that's a fair statement. And as an IT guy, I'll put on my other hat for a minute and I'll just vent for just a couple of seconds. First off, wireless is of the devil. Just wireless doesn't work. Now, I will say this: there are wireless systems that are amazing. They cost a lot of money. There are wireless systems that don't cost a lot of money that can work. As a general rule, as a sound man, I hate wireless. I'm just gonna lay it out in black and white. I hate wireless. I will take a wired microphone over a wireless microphone any day, a wireless system, and I have played on them. I know them. There's encrypted versions, there's non encrypted that still work. 2.4 gigahertz, 5 gigahertz, Wi Fi's rampant now. Like he was talking about, there's interference. Not going to get into all the details. The average user doesn't understand what these technologies, why they interfere in things. But the point I'm going to say is if you're going to invest in something technology wise to try not to get wireless first. Try to go wired first because that's just one more thing that can go wrong the second. And the other problem is there are frequently times where you can practice with it and it's fine. And then you get on Sunday morning and all of a sudden there's 350 new phones present. And you're like, well, it worked there in practice. Well, there wasn't anybody there. I'm sorry. So this is why I have trust issues with wireless and I try to avoid it. And I'm the network guy. I set the wireless up and I have trust issues with it. So
one of the things that I use my wireless guitar system exclusively. I always carry guitar cables with me just in case I forget to charge it or something, which happened one time. Yeah. I was in the middle of the last song and my guitar went out and I'm just up there just miming like I'm playing because I couldn't figure out why I couldn't hear myself. Well, it's because wireless died.
That's another problem too. Bringing a tablet that hadn't been charged. Can't tell you how many times I've been burned by that. And I'm not talking about our musicians where Rob and I both play. I'm just talking about I get there, I'm ready to run it from an iPad because I'm the only one there running it. And then all of a sudden, oh man, I got 10%. And I got to remember how to run the board. I got to go find the buttons again. So that's a valid point. Even with the tech that you know and trust, there's still gotchas.
But the other side of that is I've got this wireless guitar system that I use exclusively. Well, my in-ear monitors are not wireless. I don't have a wireless transmitter for my in-ears. So I'm free as far as my guitar is concerned, but I'm still stuck to the P16 by a cable. Now I got a really long cable that looks really ugly on the floor, but luckily, nobody's sitting up high enough and as far as, the point of view where they can see it on the floor. Yeah. I'm sure the cameras can pick it up. That's probably not great.
No, they're so far away that they don't really see it at an angle steep enough. But to the point, you can go wireless all day, and you still have wires. There's always something that you have to wire to or do something. So that's why I'm not a big fan of wireless overall speaking. But all of this, just to kind of wrap this up, unless you have something specific you wanted to mention.
Not really.
The point in this is if you experience these things, hey, our practices have gone from being an hour to 2.5 hours. We've got musicians that are getting frustrated with each other. We don't understand why everybody's kind of at odds with each other, that there's this tension every week. Take a step back and think, what have we added? What have we changed? If it's technology, just strip it away. Just say, hey, we're going to go without multi-tracks this week. We're going to go acoustic, or we're just going to play straight up 4-on-the-floor set. Let's play a few songs and get back to what we know works. Let's build that relationship musician-wise. Let's work with each other. And the whole point of this is take the technology out and then build it one thing at a time. Okay, we're back. We're in a groove. Our practices are back to where we're happy when we leave every week. Now let's add something. Let's add a new, hey, you want to try a new guitar pedal? Let's do that this week. Nobody else had anything else. Let's get that happy. Or we want to swap to using iPads. Well, let's let one person do it and work out the kinks, and then we'll add 3 more. And then, so the point is, take your time, baby steps. If you feel like every week you're dealing with everything, just back it out. Start over, get fundamental, lay it all down, and say, okay, build on the drums, build on the bass. I think you'll find that your time is better spent that way. The click track would be the one exception. I think most bands benefit from a click track. So even if you get rid of multi-tracks, it's still good to have a click track going. Like you said, it builds trust. Anything other than that, Rob, you got?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
What you're talking about running click tracks, I've got, friends that are in secular bands, rock bands, and their drummer, one of the ones I'm talking about, the drummer, what he does is when they're about to go play a concert, he puts in the album, and he like just hits play on it and plays along with the album in his in-ears live. And it's the craziest thing. And this band is like, this is a top-notch band I'm talking about like probably about, I don't know, 6 months they had the #1 rock single on the charts. And
let me clarify, is he playing their songs?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I thought you were saying he was playing like somebody else's rendition of their song and just playing along with it. You're talking about...
No, he's like, he gets the recording from like when they mastered the album.
I got you. So this is Lars Ulrich playing, Metallica in his ears while they're playing.
Yes. But he plays along with the album.
I would not be able to do that.
Oof,
that's too compressed. Hard, it's too clean. It would dry. Yuck. I'm just going to leave it at yuck. I would not be able to pull that off.
But I didn't even know about that until my father told me about it, because he went on tour with them. It was fun. But
well, we were actually talking about that at our last practice, and we'll finish with this, was having a week where you don't have a drummer for practice, but then live and you have to put the drums in on the multi-tracks was a good example of the drums just don't feel the same. Well, these are compressed recorded tracks that are coming in like a CD versus having actual live channels that can be mixed and stuff. So sometimes it can be a rude awakening when you throw that in. And I'll tell you, the worst one is when you've got a multi-track with like 5 guitarists, and you got a guitarist that comes in and he's trying to figure out where in those 5 guitarists he can play. It's like, which part can I mute and play on? Because I still need the rhythm. I still need that fancy guitar that nobody can ever find, So even when you're good with tech can still cause major issues. So on that, I think we can wrap it up unless you got something else, man.
No, that's it.
Hope you join us from here on out. We're trying to gather some info, so drop us a line, leave us some comments. We're going to try to expand to some different areas. We are doing a podcast now, an audio podcast. We'd like to expand who we're doing it. So if you want to hear us in a different way or see us, drop us a comment and let us know. Anyway, God bless. Have a wonderful week.